Hello everybody, welcome to episode 31 of Show For You. Today we'll be going over the Phantom Troupe arc of Hunter x Hunter. Now this arc spans from about episode 38 to 58, and it follows the Phantom Troupe. So we start off as I left off in the previous video about the game Greed Island and Killua, and going looking for a way to acquire this game. So before this happens and before they go to York New City for an auction to purchase the game, we end up going to Kurapika's point of view for a little bit. And Kurapika has learned an end from this dude they've met out in the woods, and he's looking for a job. And he gets put on a job because it says he wants to be near the Phantom Troop, so he's put on a job with the Mafia, and he is sent to defend this man's daughter. His daughter's name is Neon, and the man's name is Nostrad. So they are sent to this mansion, and there are multiple, hitmen there, not hitmen, bodyguards, and they're put in here to be tested, and eventually they are tested. They do things such as fighting, and eventually they have to figure out who is the imposter among them, which Kurapika does flawlessly. But then after that, they are put to security detail, and so they are sent with Neon to York New City to go to the auction and just take her around, take care of her. And well, throughout this, we see as the York New City auction prepares to get kicked off. However, when the day comes for them to kick it off, they are in the big auditorium, and then the Phantom Troop pulls up, and the Phantom Troop absolutely kills everyone in there, obliterates everyone, and then attempts to steal the items which are supposed to be auctioned off. However, there are these 10 individuals in the Mafia known as Shadow Beast, and they were able to get away with the items and protect them before the auction could happen and before the Phantom Troop could steal them. So this leads to the Shadow Beast looking for the Phantom Troop looking for the Shadow Beast because they're trying to figure out who has the items. And they presume it's the Shadow Beast, they presume it's the Mafia, so they kind of regroup and they go looking for him. So they go looking for him, and eventually we see as the Phantom Troop is in pursuit, and we see as they end up coming in contact with the Shadow Beast. Now, at first, it is one Shadow Beast against the Phantom Troop, and eventually the Phantom Troop actually beats that Shadow Beast, and they acquire the items. However, after this, they send 4 Shadow Beasts after the Phantom Troop, and this is a 4v1 because we're throughout this, the person who's predominantly going up against the Shadow Beast is this man by the name of Uval. Now, Uval, his name's Uval Jean, but they just call him Uval. Now, Uval is this big, buff, bulky man, and so he goes up against the 4 Shadow Beasts, and he handily deals with them. So one of the Shadow Beasts does get him, though, because he has this power to insert larvae into people, and it causes eggs to develop in their bladder, and they are activated by ammonia, and once they are activated, they essentially kill you. And they successfully pull that attack off. But besides that, Uval is relatively fine. So eventually, Uval is moved after beating this. He's moved away. But then, Kurapika, who was at the battle because the people with Neon ended up actually following the Phantom Troop and Shadow Beast because they were trying to figure out what happened at the auction and what almost went down. And so they followed him, and Kurapika's okay, I know this is the Phantom Troop because Kurapika's family the Kurta clan was killed by the Phantom Troop, so he has a need to get revenge against them. So eventually this happens, and soon Uval and Kurapika come in contact, and they're yo, we're gonna fight. But before this, Kurapika's been hunting him down, but eventually he finds Uval, and before they fight, Kurapika comes in contact with Hisoka, and we knew that Hisoka was not a member of the Phantom Troop because of that shower scene where he removed the Phantom Troop logo of the spider off his back, and Kurapika and Hisoka discuss, and they make a deal because they have a common interest, because Kurapika wants to destroy the Phantom Troop, and Hisoka wants to fight Crollo, who is the boss, and that's why he's faking to be in there, because he wants to fight Crollo. So they come to a deal, and then eventually Kurapika ends up fighting with Uval, and this is a sick battle. I love this battle because Uval was really cool in it, and but yeah, they end up fighting all that. But yeah, so with this, Kurapika ultimately ends up killing Uval. Well, Uval technically kills himself because Kurapika uses his sick abilities. So Kurapika's ability is these 5 chains. I would absolutely wear these as a fashion statement if I could because they were awesome. But he has a little bracer on each of the digits right there on not the metacarpals, that's the phalanges, but the metacarpals have the chains running down him into his arm. And he has this thing called chain gel or something like that, and it is used specifically for Phantom Troop. He has 2 chains that are specifically just for Phantom Troop members, and he can't use them against anything else because he made a contract to make his power greater for those 2 chains. And so he uses that chain to capture them, and then he can throw like a little dagger into the heart of people with the other one, and this makes it to where they cannot break a certain contract or they are killed by it. And we see that Kurapika specifically went after Uval after learning about the Troupe's actions and all that because he wanted to see if the strongest person could break through his chain shell, which he couldn't. So, but eventually Kurapika ends up killing Uval because Uval ends up breaking that contract through the little, like, piercing pinky, I believe it's a pinky finger chain, and so he ends up dying. Now, this absolutely elicits the rage of the Phantom Troop, and the Phantom Troop are now looking for who they refer to as the Chain Wielder or the Chain Bearer. And through this, they eventually come to learn that the person who the Chain Wielder is in contact with is Nostrad and his daughter Neon. So they're like, okay, so they're just kind of looking into Nostrad more, learning about his background. And Nostrad is specifically, so I guess, caring for his daughter Neon because she can tell the future. She has a Nin ability which allows her to read the future, though she's not really conscious of it. And she is being defended for that reason. She's being at the auction for that reason because he wants to keep her satiated, so she'll keep reading fortunes and making him money. So, with this, the Phantom Troop prepared to go and make contact with Neon, capture her, or just really make contact with her, because how Krollo's ability works is if he touches a person, or, makes contact with a person, then he can copy their ability. He has this little book, and when he opens the book, he can use that specific ability, but he can only use one ability at a time, and the book has to be opened. So this ends up happening, and Nostrad's like, okay, they're looking for my daughter, and he sends everyone from his little bodyguard group to look for who's trying to get with Neon, but Neon actually ends up running off, gets in a taxi, and the person in the taxi with her is Krollo, but he's under disguise. And so, with that, Krollo ends up taking her to dinner. They end up discussing briefly. She reads his fortune, so he learns about what's going to happen, because hers is definitive 100% will happen. Well, most likely will happen, but she says it's 100%. But as we see later on, it doesn't always happen, or at least not happen in the way you think it will happen. But, so she doesn't, and he ends up making contact with her, so he gets her ability now, and he can do this. And so with this, eventually he ends up going to the auction house with her, where there is a big raid, people are freaking out, and Neon is evacuated and eventually saved by her bodyguard people. But while there, we learn that a hit has been put on Krollo by the Mafia, and the hit who has been sent after him because they are the only, because I mean they killed a lot of the Shadow Beasts, therefore the Mafia is now after the Phantom Troop, so they sent their highest assassins after him, which is the members of the Zoldyck family, Xenon, or I think it's just Xeon, and Silva, and that is Kurapika's granddad and father. Silva is his father, Xeon is his granddad. And so we ultimately see a fight between Xeon and Krollo, which is a really cool fight, honestly. I really enjoyed it. But he ends up beating him, but they don't end up killing him because during this, Silva gets a call, and it's from Illumi. And Illumi was contracted by Krollo to kill the Mafia bosses. And now that Krollo has killed him, and Silva and Xeon are no longer getting paid, they just quit. They're like, okay, we're done. And Krollo asks Xeon, he's like, if we would have kept fighting, would you have won? He was like, yes, I would absolutely have won. But that progresses along, and then eventually Neon gets taken back. She's taken to the hospital, and with this, I'm going to focus more on the Gon and Killua story now, because Gon and Killua, throughout this, they've been trying to find a way to make money so they can purchase Greed Island, and they've been doing things like faking arm wrestling. They briefly come in contact with a couple of Phantom Troop people through their arm wrestling endeavors, but then they just kind of move along, and they reach a point where they are looking for the Phantom Troop members because the Phantom Troop members had bounties put on their heads because the Mafia wanted them dead. So they go looking for the Phantom Troop, and they end up finding members of the Phantom Troop and tracking them down for a little bit, but then they're captured and they're taken in. But they also met a item appraisal individual throughout all of this because they were selling stuff on the side as well, like not bidding it off, but like pawning it off. And so through that, they ultimately end up meeting this dude who teaches them some technically Nin abilities, but they're not really Nin abilities. They're like ostomy, autopsy, stuff like that. And so, but they're not like the natural sense too. They're not, an ostomy's not creating an entrance or something like that. But technically it is an action, but it's not like a medical procedure. But yeah, they end up doing that. They get captured and they run away. And there's this one member of the Phantom Troop who's like, I want to recruit them. His name's Nobunaga. He kind of looks like a character. He looks like kind of like one of the like Class S or Class whatever the I can't. It's been a moment since I've read any One Punch Man. But like the high class. He looks like the ninja dude. His name's like not ninja dude, but the samurai dude. And yeah, he wants to recruit Gon and Killua, but they end up escaping. And then this moves along to eventually the point where Gon, Kurapika, and Killua, after all these events have happened, end up meeting up again, and they're discussing about how to learn the specific nin abilities. And, well, okay, I forgot a big thing. But, so at the auction, the Phantom Troop fake their deaths. They leave behind fake bodies, and everyone presumes that they're dead. And this leads Kurapika to kind of be a little bit dejected because he was kind of wanting it to himself to get the revenge. But they're dead, and Gon, Killua, and Kurapika meet up, and they're discussing, and they want to learn Nin from Kurapika because Kurapika's kind of mastered it. And they're talking, and eventually they end up finding out that the Phantom Troop is in fact not dead. The living... Oh yeah, it's because Hisoka ends up texting Kurapika, and he's like, the ones that were supposed to be dead are not dead. So they learn about that, and now they are planning on taking down the Phantom Troop. Now, with that, we see as eventually Gon and Killua are captured by the Phantom Troop. Now, with the Phantom Troop having them in tow, because they're looking for Kurapika, and they learn that Kurapika is in contact with Gon and Killua, and that kind of leads one thing leads to the other, and eventually they are in a predicament where they have the upper hand. Now, through this, they end up going to a hotel where everything's kind of transpiring, but then Kurapika ultimately is able to end up and capture Crollo through a plan that him and Leorio laid out and kind of slightly conveyed to Gon and Killua. But yeah, this ends up happening, and they end up capturing the boss. So now there's a hostage situation where the boss is in the hands of Kurapika, and the Gon and Killua are in the hands of the Phantom Troop. So they end up making a deal, and this takes a while because neither of them really believes that there's some schism in the Phantom Troop, because they're like, I don't really want to do this because the boss kind of said to let him die because he's just a part of the Phantom Troop, and the head of the spider can be replaced if need be. But yeah, that moves on, and they eventually end up having a meeting where Pakunoda, who is a member of the Phantom Troop, she kind of has a closer connection to Crollo, and they end up kind of getting who's talking, and eventually there's a deal where Crollo and Gon and Killua are meant to be exchanged, but before this, Kurapika ends up putting a chain in the heart of Crollo, so that he can no longer use Nin abilities, and this plays a role later on. But then after this, he also puts a chain on Pakunoda's heart, and then they move on, and eventually the deal happens. They exchange, everything goes swell, but then Hisoka shows up because he needs to get his end of the deal, and he's like, all right, I'm here to fight Crollo. But Crollo reveals to him, hey, I no longer have Nin abilities, so he's like, bro, I ain't doing that anymore. So I was really hoping to see Crollo and Hisoka fight, but that didn't end up happening, sadly, because it would have been a sick fight. But yeah, then just move along, and eventually everything's good, and Gon and Killua are down to look for more, look for the island, Green Island a little bit more, in which they end up going to the auction, and they end up seeing two of the Phantom Troop members, and they freak out because they think they're going to attack them, but then they meet up, and they reconcile. But they reconcile for this reason, because when Pakunoda came back, she was just kind of dejected, and she gave her memory to all the original members of the Phantom Troop to kind of explain everything that happened and reveal how kind and pure-hearted Gon was, and Killua and Kurapika. And this ends up ultimately killing her by removing all of her memories, essentially, I guess, making her brain dead. But yeah, she ends up dying, and then they understand all this now, so they end up forgiving Gon and Killua for everything that's happened, and they just kind of come to mutual terms. But yeah, that was the Phantom Troop arc of Hunter x Hunter. Now, I really enjoyed it. I'd probably say it is my favorite arc so far, because it had really good fights, it had really good intrigue, and I'm really just ready to see what else goes on. I don't know if Crollo is going to have any more story on him, but I really hope he does, because I really enjoyed Crollo's character. Crollo was a cool character, he had a cool design, and yeah. But also, speaking of cool design, I don't think Hisoka's a pedophile, guys. I think he is just attracted to the idea of powerful opponents because, like, there was a couple times where he used his turned on terminology, and it was just in terms of power because he says it briefly when talking about the idea of fighting Crollo, and so I don't think this is gonna ultimately lead to anything crazy. Oh yeah, I forgot one point. It's the fortune teller point because Crollo ultimately ends up getting that ability, and when he comes back to the Phantom Troop, he's like telling everyone's fortunes, kind of figure out that hey, there's a prophecy that 6 of the Phantom Troop members, or 5 more of the Phantom Troop members, are gonna die off. And at one point, Hisoka is asked to read his fortune, but he ends up swapping it out to give them the other fortune. So they kind of revealed that he was in cahoots with Kurapika, but he doesn't reveal the whole thing. And they presume that he's doing this due to some sort of law rather than his just deal with Kurapika. So they believe he's under control even when he isn't. But yeah, that's just kind of a brief plot point. It doesn't actually end up playing too much into the story besides them still believing that Hisoka is with them. But yeah, so I think Hisoka's still going to probably be one of my favorite characters because, like I said, I don't believe he's a pedophile. I just believe he is attracted to violence, to battle. But then I liked Kurapika. Kurapika is still one of my favorites. Kurapika had a really cool design. He changed his red and blue to a golden blue cloak, so it was really cool. And yeah, I think it's still relatively close standings for who is my favorite. I'd say Crollo is up there now, but I just really don't know if he's going to get any more story behind him. I hope he does, because I want to see more about Crollo, because he could be my favorite character. But yeah, that's all I really have to say about the Phantom Troop arc of Hunter x Hunter, and that's all I have for episode 31 of Show Review. So thank you very much for watching.